Now introducing the Minor Wisdom Trio! Minor Wisdom!
Hey. So this week's a little different. Not a name that you, as a Texas theater educator, those of you that are Texas theater educators, probably know very well. But this is Gerry Speca. And the way I came across his name is I listened to, amongst other podcasts, I listened to Smartless. I think a lot of people listen to that podcast. I believe it's like one of the most popular podcasts out there. But I listened to Smartless, and those guys had Ben Affleck on. And Ben Affleck was, talking about his one of his whys, and he said his high school theater educator. And so I came home that day and said to Jennifer, I was like, man, it would be so cool to reach out to Ben Affleck's people and have Ben Affleck on to talk about his high school theater teacher. And, that's a big ask, right? But that's how I've gotten a few guests on here is I just reach out to them, and all but one has said, yeah, let's do it. So, Jennifer, my wife, says to me, said, that's not your podcast. Your podcast isn't to get celebrities on. There are lots of podcasts that do that, i.e. Smartless. Why not get his theater teacher on? And so I was like, yeah, obvi, that's the right decision. Finally, she's right. You know what I mean? Just kidding. By the way, I don't know if I said Happy Mother's Day last week, so Happy Mother's Day to everyone. Also, I'll talk about state in a second. But anyway, so I reached out to Gerry Speca, and within a very, very short amount of time, he was like, yeah, let's do it. So fast forward to maybe one of my favorite interviews I've ever had. And again, I say that often, but you don't know your favorite until you have it. And also I can compare it to all the other ones. And this is like one of my favorites, if not my favorite, because I didn't know what to expect with him. And I guess there could be some element of celebrity to someone that has the track record of teaching Casey and Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, amongst others. And we didn't really get into those names at all. I wasn't interested in finding out stories about people other than Gerry. That's not the podcast. It's just like when I had Margaret on a few weeks ago. I really wasn't interested in knowing about Jim Parsons, and I don't mind hearing stories about them, but it wasn't my intention to ask about other people. When I have you on, I ask about you. So this was just a really fun, energetic, super energetic, and actually I think the mix is kind of loud. You're welcome, Stuart, but so it may be even too energetic as far as the audio is concerned, but it was a really, 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 really fun chat that I had a few weeks ago with Gerry. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Again, not the typical interview that I have on here, because he's not a Texas theater educator. You'll hear that right when he starts talking. But it is a great story and interview and listen nonetheless. So if you're already listening this far, you're probably committed to the podcast and to the episode itself. Speaking of state, I didn't mention two things last week. I don't know why. I didn't mention Mother's Day. I can tell you why I don't mention Mother's Day, but it's because my mom's dead. But wow, boom. But I do have a wife that has kids, so she's a mom. I do have a mother-in-law. I do have a sister who has kids. I do have an aunt that has kids, so, other people have kids, so happy Mother's Day, belated. Also, congratulations to those people that competed at state. It's over. And as I sit here, speaking of over, I'm recording this Thursday morning because I'm about to leave for California for a wedding. They're going to pump you up. And my school year is pretty much over. I have one final to proctor. I think it's a physics final. That's how we do it at the John Cooper School. But my classes are done. I don't have finals. I'm done. I'm done with students. And I am, again, leaving the classroom, not leaving education. I'm actually excited because I'm going to be able to be in lots of classrooms next year. I won't have my own, but like I told Sean at Covenant, I'm going to be a grandparent. I'm going to get to go and visit and hang out for a little bit, and then I get to leave. And that's the grandparent way of doing things. So at least most grandparents, some live with their kids or their grandkids. Mine did. My mother-in-law, not my grandparent. Oh my God. I shouldn't do this on Thursday mornings. Anyway, enough about all that. But again, congratulations to those state competing schools. Congratulations to the winners. I plan on interviewing 2 of the winners. That's my plan. Coming up on episode 200. I already put episode 200 in the can. It is with the Destiny Miller, her quote unquote goodbye to the classroom. So look forward to that. If you are a fan of the podcast, I would love for you to leave a review. I would love for you to do a 5-star. You know, I've thought about, again, it's creeping up in my head to stop doing the podcast, and I might have to with the new job. Not that they're going to tell me to, but, it just kind of feels weird to be talking to Texas theater educators when you are no longer one. But reviews help and encouragement helps. And I know there are lots of people that would love to do this podcast or be on it. And maybe that's what I do is I hand off the baton to somebody that is worthy. But it is definitely one of those things that I have loved doing. And I'm excited to be coming up on episode 200. And we'll see what happens after that. But if I do end with Destiny Miller being almost one of the first guests and potentially the last, we'll see. I don't know. Just a tease, maybe. I hope you guys enjoy this episode with Gerry. I will be in California, so if there's a problem with it, I'll do my best to fix it once I get back. I hope you enjoyed last week's Nancy Lynch. And if you're new to this because you're listening to this particular interview, go back and look at some of the other names I've had on. I've been really honored and blessed to be able to talk to some just absolute legends. And then there are some people that are on their way to be legendary. So it's been really fun. I've really enjoyed it, but we'll see what the future holds. Enjoy the interview this week. Hey, Bobby, you can go.
I spent a lot of time teaching.
Yeah.
And so that you never, or at least I'll speak for myself. I've never lost the feeling for it, the need to be somehow engaged in it. I did lose the need to have to be in the classroom every day.
Yeah.
After a while, it was like, okay, but I don't know. I still find myself thinking about it all the time, and about what I was engaged in throughout my career, and then also what I see happening in the little dribs and drabs that I collect, around me. And theater education to me is everything.
Yeah. So where are you from originally? Because a good theater person doesn't have a distinct accent. It means that they've been trained really well to kind of sound somewhat news anchorish. To
Exactly what they call it, the neutral affect or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I Every now and again you will hear. If you know the region, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. My first 18 years of life were in a small town called Carnegie, PA, which is 8 miles southwest of Pittsburgh. So people from that area, talk about the Yunzers, because Pittsburghers do have, or at least some of them do have, as many regions, a very distinct kind of accent,
Yeah.
And even some, language like we're going to red up the house, which means kind of clean, tidy up. So every now and again, when I get a little, I don't know, enthusiastic or excited or sometimes aggravated, you'll hear the broad O, or you'll hear the Pittsburgh E slip out. But I certainly don't have a Boston or a typical Boston. I never acquired one, and I studiously avoided trying to get one.
Right.
No offense to my Bostonian friends.
What made you stay in Massachusetts?
Work.
Okay.
I came to Cambridge to go to graduate school to get a master's.
Right.
When I decided I wanted to teach, someone said you need to get your what do you call them?
Your certification or
Yeah, your
yeah. Yeah.
certification, and you have to put in your practice time, et cetera.
Right.
And I really didn't. I mean, there were any number of places where I could have gone to do that, and I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to do something a little more than that. So there was a Master's of Arts in Teaching program so that I could do. I was an English major,
Right.
and I kind of, I won't say I specialized because I did not, but my focus was dramatic literature. So Shakespeare, modern drama, Ibsen. I spent a lot of time reading those folks and poetry.
Right.
So those were kind of my focuses, and I thought, well, if I could find a program where I could do a little more of that, in addition to pick up my practicum credits. So that's what happened. I was living in New York at the time. And, my plan was, go to Boston, and the program was a 12-month program. So go to Boston, get my practicum, and go back to the city and get involved in public education in the city. But I came here, and first the job market started to get a little funky, and I met some people here that I really liked. And I got involved in an alternative high school program that, at least initially, I wasn't able to become part of, because of their limited hiring. They were like 8 teachers, so
Yeah.
there was a lot of competition. But I decided to hang around, and I got a job here. I'd met a guy that I really liked, and he was a and in fact, my focus was on public education, and this guy had been the uh, department chair
Okay.
at a local private school, and that was the last thing I wanted to do. But he and I had hit it off, and I wasn't able to find work. And he said, "Well, why don't you come work with me for a year? I'm going back to this school. They're asking me to come back and kind of rejigger the program. So I'm going back, and I would love it if you'd be on my staff and do it for a year or two and see what happens." So that's what happened.
Yeah. Wow.
I ended up staying here, and the plan was still, I'm going back to New York City someday because I've got this mission. Well, that was what, Jesus, like, I even hate to say it, but it was like 1972, 73, So the idea was, within a few years, I never left, and,
Yeah.
and you meet, you get married, all that stuff happens, and life kind of guides you. I had a good friend who, when she turned 60, she was talking about how her life had turned out exactly the way she had planned it. And she said, "Well, isn't it the same for you?" And I'm like, "Oh, hell no." I said, "Oh God, no." I started off, I was going to be an attorney.
Okay.
I went to college. I'm like, I'm going to be Perry Mason. I'm going to be F. Lee Bailey. I'm going to be in the courtroom. I'm going to be, I'm going to be doing all these cool things. And little by little, that changed. I would say, I won't say accidentally, because
Right.
certainly, but the influences led me in different directions.
That's funny you mentioned Perry Mason was my mother's absolute like favorite thing to watch. That's very funny. That brings back a lot of memories.
Well, what was so funny was, when I was a kid, I had a neighborhood buddy who read avidly, and the one thing he read was all the Earl Stanley Gardner stuff,
Yeah.
all the Perry. So I hooked into that, and then of course it came on TV, and it's like, wow, this is really cool. That's what I want to do with my life. I want to be that guy. Didn't work out. Well, I'm glad it didn't,
Yeah.
actually. When I look back on it, not that I would have regretted, working in the legal profession, but I kind of like where it ended up. So
Yeah.
it's like, I'm happy with that.
So you mentioned that you kind of, because my situation currently, it's going to change soon, but I teach Shakespeare classes at my school, and they're just Shakespeare classes 24/7. There's nothing outside of that. It's to seniors. And so, as a theater teacher, we always say Shakespeare's meant to be performed, not read. So when you mentioned a few minutes ago that you were studying kind of the literature and such and reading that stuff, were you reading it with the intent to perform it, or knowing that you needed to perform it, or what was kind of your way of
when I
studying
was,
it?
when I was studying it,
Yeah.
I was studying it because it's literature.
Right.
You're an English major. What are you going to do? Well, I like dramatic literature. I mean, I certainly did. I paid my dues with 18th century this, that, and
Yeah.
the history of the novel and all that. I did all of that, but my real, and maybe it was because plays were, for me, easier to read.
Right.
I don't know why, but I fell in love. Well, I always liked, I have to say, from probably the time I was like 8. the whole idea of performing and being on stage and singing and making music and acting in plays. I was fascinated with that. I won't tell you that I was any good at it. That doesn't matter. But I was fascinated with it. So plays rang a lot of bells. And I'll credit myself with having a half decent imagination. So I'm reading a play and the whole thing is playing in
Right.
my head. But it was still at that point literature. And I'm interested in what you said about teaching it, because when I was in graduate school, I got hooked up. Instead of doing the typical practicum stuff, I got hooked up with this alternative program. And basically, they said, I had a mentor, and basically they said, "You're going to teach.
Yeah.
You're not coming into my class and doing a lesson. You're getting a class. So what are you going to teach?" And I said, "I'm going to do Shakespeare.
Wow.
It's the canon, right?"
Yeah.
And so I hope this will lead us someplace that's important. So I did the first semester. I did, and I have to say this: the class was non-age, non-ability graded. So I had ninth graders, 12th graders. In the first class, I had a kid who was dyslexic and had a hard time reading, and a kid who was applying to Yale and eventually got in. They were in the same classroom. So the problem was, how do you make this viable for this vast array of talents? In the first semester, it worked very well. Whatever I was doing, which I really don't remember. And then I was going to do a second semester, and a lot of the kids signed up for the course. And it was the philosophy. One of the philosophies in the school was those who are governed ought to have a say in the government.
Right.
And a kid came to me and said, the best way to read the best way to study Shakespeare would be to put it on. Could we put on a play? Could we study a script and really tear it apart? And then the final exam would be. I thought, holy shit, this is really a great idea. Oh, wow. So that's what I did. We did Midsummer Night's Dream. And then that was the hook for me, because then again, kind of by accident, my two of my great loves, teaching, working with kids, and the theater and dramatic literature, three of my great loves came together. And it was like, oh, well, that was the drug.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what got me. I didn't, I was not a trained theater person.
Right.
So I didn't get an MFA in acting, directing, any playwriting, any of that. I was an English major, language and literature. But that particular experience gave me another item that I had in my arsenal when I applied for other jobs. It was like, oh, I'll do the plays. And in doing that, I realized I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I better figure this out. So I studied, I woodshed it. And so then that evolved into, when the time came, hey, would you like to lead a theater program, in the high school? It was like, yeah, I can. Well, it was yeah, and then there was another part of me said, "Oh no, don't do this. You don't have the pedigree." And the good news was, at that point in the city of Cambridge, they had developed the school committee had permitted the arts department to create a 4-year theater program, but they wouldn't, at the time, they didn't have the funding, I guess, to bring somebody in from the outside. In other words, a trained person, someone who had gone to, a reputable theater arts program. So they said, you have to find somebody within the system. And they couldn't, except that they knew that I was doing plays in the alternative program and that I was teaching a Shakespeare class. So they came to me, and I was ready to leave. I was transitioning. I'd put in my 7 years, and I'm like, okay, this has really been a lot of fun, but I think I'm burning out. I think I'm going to go be an actor now. I'm going to go do something else. And they came to me and said, you're pretty qualified for this. How about doing it for a year? Another one of those hooks.
Yeah.
How about doing this for a year? Come down to the drama department, develop a 4-year program. And, if you still have the itch that you need to do something else, by that time, the money will have shaken loose. Well, it was 12 years later when I left. So, so anyway, I'm probably telling you way more than you need to hear, but that was the kind of the cycle.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing I should say is that when I went to graduate school, it was a 12-month program, and the first 3 months were during the summer. And I had a master teacher who was from England, and he practiced what at the time was called creative drama, which is basically theater arts without all the bullcrap, without all the fighting and infight and all that. It was like use all of the elements of theater arts training as a way of opening up the classroom. So that became part of how I did theater.
Right.
And I think Ben, sometimes in the past, has referred to the fact that there was that I really, insisted on there not being a hierarchy,
Right.
that the spear carrier was just as important as the person with, 110 lines. And people call it a cliche, until you point out to them, don't be the spear carrier chewing gum on stage in the middle of a really powerful scene, because you just ruined it.
Yeah. Right.
Somebody, your director is going to be really mad at you,
So, the obvious, the obvious former students aside, you were probably an inspiration to others. It's not just the public figures, right? So why do you think you kind of had this, so we'll call it a gift, of amongst many other words, this gift to inspire? What was it about you that was able to kind of infiltrate the minds of these kids to kind of get them to run through a wall for you?
I really don't know, except that I'll take a shot at it, and I don't think,
Yeah.
obviously, it does have something to do with me, because I did it,
Yeah.
right? Whatever happened, I did it. But I'll go back to my master teacher. He also talked about creating learning in a learning environment. He talked about creating a sense of group. And here we were, all English teachers, and he's teaching us theater games.
Right.
And in essence, he was saying, the first couple of weeks of class, invest in this. Make these people feel as if they're part of something in which they have a stake.
Right.
And I thought, well, shit, my God, what a brilliant educational philosophy. Make every person in the room feel as if, number one, not only that empowerment stuff that everybody talks about, that they're important, but that they actually have something to contribute.
Right.
That there's a way in which, no matter who they are, whether they think they're skilled as a speaker or whatever, they have a way of supporting the whole group in this learning thing. And so I don't know. When I look back on it, I really don't know. I mean, I think there was a part of me that really wanted to create these communities.
Right.
And this, you're a teacher, that's when it works the best.
Yeah.
When everybody in the room is like cooking and tuned in, and even the ones who aren't doing so well in terms of getting to high grades, or they're kind of not doing their homework, if they get this sense of, I'm important here. I have a contribution to make. I'd like to think that was part that I invested a lot of energy into connecting with every kid in the room.
Right. I mean, you clearly have an energy. Do you think that kind of contributed to it? Was there ever a time? And I'll speak for myself, not putting words into your mouth, but I've got a good energy about me. But you have these kids too that have a great energy, and then they have days where they come in and they're just not, they're off. And it's very alarming to see that kid that usually comes in bouncing off walls, and all of a sudden they're calm. Do you think that has something to do with it? Do you think people invested in you as kind of an energy and just the sort of invested personality that you seem to have?
I think that's true. I mean, I'll accept that as a truism for anybody.
Okay.
I'm talking to you now, and I'm feeling your energy, and I'm like, remember I said with the emails, I'm saying, oh, I'm not really good at this, but I'm talking to someone who's I'm cool.
Yeah.
I'm fine. And I think the other thing, and I don't know if this ties in with what you were saying, but the other thing is you allowed them to be that person.
Yeah.
Because I'm that person. There are days I come in, I don't even want to see your sorry behind, but I have to teach. So I want you to understand, here's what's going on. And this is real. And you're going to deal with me and give me room to be whatever goofy person I am today. And I'm going to do the same for you. And some kind of agreement. I can think of maybe 3 times when an experience with a student drove me to a position where I just wanted to, either quit
Right.
or kill somebody.
Right.
I hate to say that; that's an awful thing to say, but
I get it.
that kind of emotion where you don't know what to do. Otherwise, I really believe Jeff Fox was the guy's name, and Jeff is to me a giant. Ben Affleck talks about me. Well, I'll talk about Jeff until I die.
Yeah.
But he was one who really. Talked about all of those elements, about bringing the energy, about allowing young people to be who they are, about creating environments where they could see themselves.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question. I have a tendency to
You
sometimes
did.
go astray. Good.
You know, the beauty of this podcast is that it's not about me, it's about you. So it's whatever you have to say. It doesn't, I can cut all my stuff out and it would still be great.
Well, I hope you leave some of your
Yeah, no,
stuff in.
I will. I am. I am. So, you know, down here in Texas, which is, when I say that, it sounds very country to me, but down here in Texas, we have this thing called UIL One Act Play, the University of Interscholastic League One Act Play Festival, right? And it's about an 8 to 10 week process where they go through different levels. It's almost like playoffs for football, right? Um, and it has been the result of that over the past 100 years is that almost every school, high school in the state of Texas, has a theater department, and uh, it has grown the world of high school theater, even middle school theater to an extent. So up in Massachusetts and even New York, where you wanted to teach, and even Pittsburgh, where, you know, outside of Pittsburgh, where you grew up, I don't think those types of systems are in place. So what is it that, or correct
Well,
me?
there is. Well, there's a. I was about to say something. I was like, yeah, sounds like a Texas thing to do,
Yeah,
right? Turn it into a competition.
it's true.
Except that in the Boston area, and this is part of my story.
Yeah.
In the Boston area, there was, and there still is. They call it something different now, but there was the Massachusetts High School Drama Guild,
Okay.
and they did exactly the same thing. In Texas, where apparently you folks are more enlightened, it seems to have resulted in there being theater departments in, you know, every high school, or at least close to that. In Massachusetts, that wasn't the case. There was
Right.
a lot of battling over, you know, what were the important ways to use money, and very often it wasn't. You know, the theater person was, well, I never want to denigrate him, because that was me at a
Right.
time in my career. But the theater person was the English teacher who could stand being in the room with 15 kids after school for a period of time to make a play.
Right.
Um, but there were, I think it had, at least as far as I understand it, and you know, I haven't done that in years, so I don't know where it's progressed.
Right.
But at the time I was doing it, there were still, you know, school department, and fairly well heeled systems that, you know, were struggling to put together a good arts program.
Right.
So what happened in Texas as a result of your competition didn't really happen in Massachusetts. And the one thing I'll tell you that will make you laugh is when I took this gig in the drama department, you know, my 1 year gig, the first thing I was told was, well, you have to do a competition. What?
Yeah.
You know, every January to April, there's the Massachusetts High School Drama, and we've participated for years. And I'm like, drama's not a sport.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not doing that. You know, and so there was like, oh no, but you must. We have a tradition to uphold. So I said, but I think as you probably, I hope you know. I mean, what I figured out was it was a hook. I
Yeah.
mean, I hated it in the sense of I didn't like the idea. You know, we're now we've got our power forward,
Yeah.
whoever that actor is, you know, and we're gonna cultivate this superstar to win championships. But I found that my kids hooked into it,
Yeah.
and it was a way to say to them, well, my favorite line was, "How good do you want to be?" And
Yeah.
and you can't be good. You know, someone else is going to confer that on you. So you have to figure out, what's that mean? What do you want to achieve? Like, okay, we're going to go into this competition. All right, so what do you want to have happen?
Yeah.
And you know, and we stumbled on that thing. Well, you're gonna do this show for like, you know, 8, 900, 1,200 strangers. They don't know a damn thing about you. They don't know who you are. What they're going to know about you at the end of your 40 minutes on stage is what you leave there.
Right.
So what do you want that to be? So that turned out to be the hook for me. And then I laughed at myself because I was deep into the competition. You know, it's like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah, you start to, as I told my students, you know, because I wasn't raised in the competitive world. I was raised in Texas, but I went to a performing arts school, and so we didn't compete. And so when I became a teacher, that's when I started competing, and I would tell my students, I don't want you to worry about the competition, but once you advance, it's going to taste good, and you're going to want it. You're going to want it more. Um, and so, and that's true. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but the administrators love successful contests, you know, because you get a little emblem, or you get a trophy, or you get some sort of recognition for the school. So
Well, the first year that we won the state competition, somebody dared to say, "You're a genius. You're a genius." And I said, "Hold on, time out. I did. I've been doing plays now for 3, 4 years here. Nobody, most of you didn't even come to see the show,
yeah,
and now all of a sudden, because I won this champion, so I was I have, and I still am, as you can see, pretty cynical about all that. But you're right. For the kids, yeah, you
yeah,
get the juice, except for the one who wins the acting award and then thinks you can't teach him anything
right,
anymore.
right. Yeah,
That's not the result I wanted.
it's backfired. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I do want to say Ben was not one of those.
Yeah, that's good.
Was not.
What so when did you kind of, or maybe you never did, when did you kind of feel like you finally figured it out when it came to being able to teach theater or direct a show, or just kind of train up an actor or technician, or did you ever feel that way?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it's, to me, it's a yin and yang thing. I mean, I think there clearly was a time when I said to myself with great um, conviction, I can do this.
Yeah.
I know how. I have a body, but I don't know. I read recently an article about a teacher who talked about, what is it? I had never um, I'd never heard it phrased this way, but the imposter theory.
Yeah.
That you're doing this stuff and somebody's going to find out that you really don't know what the hell you're talking
Yeah.
about. I lived with that every day of my teaching
Yeah.
career because I was always, well, there's my wife works in the, staff development,
Right.
educational staff development, and there's an awful lot of talk now among those folks about the curriculum and how the curriculum it's not, kids can get content anywhere, it has to be something else, et cetera, et cetera. Years ago, maybe 30 years ago, I heard a guy from BU, a professor emeritus of great status, say something about the curriculum is in the room with you.
Right.
The curriculum isn't in the textbook. It's who are the people, who are the individuals. And I just love that idea. But if you adopt that idea, it means every time you have a new class, you really don't know.
Right.
And you have to. So there's a part of me that says, yeah, I know how to muster the resources, but then there's that other question: how successful will you be?
Yeah.
How will this work? And that's terrifies me to this day. I had I won't tell you the story because it's long and it's kind of boring, but I ended up with a private student that I did Zoom sessions with, and she was like 12, and I
Yeah.
know nothing about 12 years old. I work with 13 to 18-year-olds mostly.
Yeah.
When I was teaching, so like, what do I know about a 12-year-old? And so every time we had a session, I'd be going through all of that. But by the same token, she was so eager to learn
Right.
that's what carried me. And I felt like I just got to keep bringing stuff. And yeah, there was a question of, will this work? And I kept saying to myself, you're old enough now to realize if it doesn't work, you're going to see something that will guide you to something that might work.
Right.
So yeah, I don't, even to this moment, I could tell you, when I hear even someone say something as wonderful as Ben and Matt have said over the years, it's like, I don't know if I know that guy, but I'm grateful that you think he exists.
Yeah.
I'm really happy
Yeah.
about that. But I don't know. There were those times when I'm like, what am I doing? And in fact, there was one show we did. I'll never forget this. And you've probably had this experience. We were getting ready to do a show, and a kid who was going to be on the tech staff came into my office, and he was so excited. He was so excited. He was beside himself with excitement. I can't wait till we get started. This is going to be so great. He went on and on and on. And I went home and I said to my wife, I don't think I can do this. There's these kids have so much.
Yeah.
This kid had so much invested in it. I'm like, I'm not that good. I can't live up to that kind of enthusiasm. But as you know, when you have to go in the next day, you better find something.
Yeah.
Even if you don't think you're any good, you better find something to bring to the table because it's on you, brother.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of almost have to cut the reins and just let them go. And if they fall flat on their face, they'll get back up, dust off, and figure out what they did to get to where they got. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I get it. I don't know if I have overly excited technicians. I definitely have it in the acting world, but my technicians are usually off in the corner, trying to hide and stay away as much as possible. So how did you figure out the tech side of things? Because that's a whole that I'm transitioning to outside of the classroom. I'm not leaving education, but I'm leaving the classroom to become more of a technical theater consultant, and
Oh, wow.
I'll travel around, and I'm working under the umbrella of a company, and I'm very excited about it. But I know my monotone voice would not tell you that I'm excited about it, but I am. I truly am. But
No, you're not monotonic. You have a nice measured quality.
I thank you.
You're not exploding into the microphone, which is kind of good.
Yeah, I'll Venmo you $20 for saying that. But anyway,
Oh, thank you. I'll take 'em. I'll take the 20.
but the down here, it's the tech theater educators are leaving. They're all they're going off to the real world now, especially now that COVID is less than. I'm not going to say it's eradicated because it's not, but we the tech educators are going back to the real world. Becoming lighting and sound technicians. But so it's a problem that there aren't enough. The reason I bring all that up isn't to necessarily talk about Texas, but talk about you. And it's not an easy task to learn how to be a technician, a designer. And you mentioned the imposter syndrome element. My professor in college at University of Houston, a guy named Kevin Rigdon, who's a Tony nominated, designer, very reputable, would always say, I'm always worried that when I walk into a space, somebody's going to figure me out to be a fraud. Right. And so it's a similar mindset, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a long, long way of asking, how did you kind of get your grasp on the tech design side of being a theater educator?
But I think I was lucky
Yeah.
because at some point in my theater education history, in the city of Cambridge, we would hire designers. My boss, who
Okay.
we would hire designers, hire people to come in, and then we kind of execute. You can imagine initially the designs. First of all, financially, because when I first went to the department, we had limited funding. So
Right.
so I worked with the idea. So the first thing was I worked with the idea that tech had to be really simple. It had to be really simple. Yeah, if we're going to hang lights, it might be four, and we're going to have two areas on stage, and the whole idea was if you give me a board, you give me a couple blocks and two actors, I'll make you a play that you can watch and enjoy. And so for me, I'm not a technical person
Right.
at all. So at some point, I was really fortunate in that we then had the funding to hire a technical director. And this guy, Steve Hall, was a giant. And he was a giant, first of all, because he was a skilled designer and a skilled technician. He could do it all himself, but he loved imparting that to the kids.
Right.
And I would say my role is that well, initially I was doing some of that. We get a designer, and then I'd say, okay, blah, 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 and what little knowledge I had. And I had some. I learned it on the fly, and I learned it from being in plays. It's no training that way, training in terms of experience. So
Right.
I had some. But the stuff that we ended up doing on a technical level was way beyond my ken. So I lucked out that way. But the thing that I think worked for me, and we talked about this young man who came in, he was all excited, was I made it
Yeah.
a philosophy that everybody does. The actors did tech. You will come in and paint the stage.
Right.
You will have a job that you will execute. Now I understand when showtime comes, you have another responsibility, but there's all kinds of grunt work that has to happen before we even get close to showtime, and you're going to participate, and
Right.
we're going to invite technicians. So in our in our festival competition, they had a 5-minute setup rule. You had 5 minutes to set the stage. So the idea was you couldn't have a complicated setting. Well, this guy, Steve Hall, created the most complicated sets that you could imagine for a traveling show. And what we did was we turned the setup into a show. So the technicians became actors. So in their 5 minutes, they each had, so that the audience could watch this thing come together So I'm not saying everybody should do that. I'm not
Right.
saying it was brilliant, but the net effect was to say this is just as important. So for those of you who don't have the interest or the skill, how from your perspective, to want to be on walking the floorboards, there's all kinds of cool stuff and all kinds of ways for you to contribute significantly to something that it will, we hope, entice and please audiences.
Right.
So again, I don't know if I've, for me, they always went hand in hand. And so that was my philosophy, but I certainly I couldn't do what you're doing. I couldn't do it then, and I can't do it now, but I'll give myself credit for being able to recognize when
Right.
you find somebody who can do it, to nurture that and give them whatever support they need. So by the end of my time in that venue, in that working situation, kids were designing the shows.
Right.
They were designing the lighting, they were designing the sets, and Steve was just supervising. Here's what you need to know. So the thing grew into something so organically beautiful, I think. So that's part of it as well. When you hear some of those students speak glowingly, they were really involved in something that they weren't just, okay, move that chair over there and you're done.
Yep.
It was like, well, figure out where the chair should go, and help us to think that out. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's the kids that have been given ownership that
Yes.
typically leave a program a little more energetic and grateful than maybe somebody that just never kind of took those, again, I said reins already, but took those reins.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, thanks.
Works for me.
Yeah, why not? This is kind of a fun question, and maybe you don't have an answer to it. You may have a couple of answers, but what's a play that you produced or directed that made you most proud, and why?
Oh, wow. There were quite a few.
Yeah, I'm
There
sure.
were quite a few. In the competition, we had I'm assuming at your school you have a huge interest as well. We had a huge interest. So when we go to competitions, you'd see shows with 3 actors, 3 character plays, which were what the school systems could either afford or the interest level. But I had, I'd have the festival show. I'd have 90 kids show up for audition. And if you have 90 kids showing up for an audition, it's like, oh, we're going to pick 3 of you.
Yeah.
First of all, it didn't make logistical sense in one way, but it didn't make education sense.
Right.
So we started writing our own scripts.
Okay.
And so there were a couple of those. There were several of those. And what I tried to do was maybe the first one I did most of the writing. But what I tried to do, once the kids got hooked into this idea that with our competitions we could do this
Collaboratively, or
thank you
yeah,
for the word. We could do this collaboratively. So we did a lot of collaborative playwriting. So I come in with a basic idea, and then sometimes the idea would be a storyline. Sometimes it would be, okay, we want to here's what we're trying to do. Here's the theme. What can we do? We did a thing based on the Commedia dell'arte. We called it Commedia Mania, and it was a riot. And the kids, basically, we said, well, here's what Commedia is, and here's what would happen. Yes, there's a little bit of a storyline, but basically there were maybe 200 plots, if that. There were X number of plots, and basically it was like, okay, we're doing this plot today. Go out there and do something. And we got the mask. So they just invented these riotous, hilarious skits that then we linked together into a story about this traveling Italian road show, whatever. So there were, I can't pick, but there was one that I based on on Pittsburgh. It was called Homestead. It was about coming home, and it was about that area, the Vietnam era and stuff like that. And the kids worked really hard on that, and that won awards. And I'm proud of that, but I'm proud of all of them. And then we did a major production as well as the competition, every year. Did a musical in the summer, which I did not do. That was my time off, kind of, not really. But we did a fall program, and then we did the competition program. But in the fall, we would do a major main stage play. And I loved all of those. We did like the Caucasian Chalk Circle, Chushingura, because I was always looking for big casts. The one I really like, we did Macbeth. We did the what do they call it?
The
The Macbeth. The what play?
the Scottish play, or
Yes,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
it. We did
yeah,
the Scottish play,
yeah.
and I did it with a mostly female cast. See, I was cutting edge. I'm claiming to be cutting edge, except that it was because there were almost no boys who
Yeah,
tried out that year, and they had all these talented women. I'm like, what am I going to do? And there's always this fluff, and I thought, no, we'll do Macbeth, and
yeah,
we'll do Macbeth, and we flipped. We still well. I certainly didn't invent the idea. Thank
yeah.
you very much. But we flipped the concept. So on Shakespeare's time, men played all the parts. Okay, we got a couple men. We'll put them in the right place, but the women are going to play all the parts. We're
Right.
going to stand it on its head. So I was kind of proud of that because they did a fabulous job. It was really very cool what they did, what the women folk, the young the young women did. It was really pretty damn exciting.
Yeah,
So I think I love them all.
yeah.
So I didn't answer your question.
No, that you did. I mean, it's not an easy. It's like asking, or it's like me asking you probably who's the greatest Steeler of all time. You would
Right.
have an argument for quite a few. So, which I'm not going to ask you that, but I'm a big sports fan. So, but
Yeah.
we'll keep that aside. It's not what this podcast is about. So, what is keeping you busy now? What is something that's kind of getting the literature, the theatrical? What is something that's kind of feeding those urges right now in retirement?
Well, I read a lot. I think I mentioned early on that I love music, and
Yeah.
for a long time, my second life was I worked as a musician. Not I didn't make a lot of money, but I had a writing partner, and we were writing songs. And for a while, we had a band that played these songs. And for about 10 years, we kind of pursued that until we got until life really took over. So one of the things I've done, which gets me back in touch in some small way, is I've gone back to kind of writing tunes, writing
Okay.
songs, and I have a small project studio in my basement. It's really a mess. I call it a studio as a joke, but there's a lot of equipment down there, half of which works. Um, so I had over the years, I've always stockpiled these ideas. And mind you, we're not talking about anything that's going to rattle anybody's cage and make them excited that I'm doing it, but they excite me.
Right.
So I've now been finishing those, which for me, as I write, it's part of the writing, it's back to poetry in a way. And then as I try to perform them, it's performance, it's acting, because most of it is not directly autobiographical what
Right.
I'm writing about. I'm thinking about characters who maybe whatever. So I get to do that. And then I get to, I'm not working with other people. It's my own production.
Right.
But it's how I feed that creative urge, because frankly, at this point in my life, I'm perfectly content to mow the lawn and put my feet up and have an adult beverage and just be happy I'm alive and the weather's beautiful, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
I had, up until about a year ago, I mentioned I had this student,
Yeah.
and she was and is I've lost contact with her for a number of reasons. There were some family issues that kind of she was being homeschooled, yada. We don't
Right.
need to
Right.
know the story, but she was really the real connection,
Right.
because I took it almost under duress. And they actually, really quickly, they showed up on my back porch. Okay, I live on Cape Cod, right?
Yeah.
They came from Maine.
Wow.
They came from Maine. Now they had gone to Cambridge, which is still an hour and a half from where I live. And they showed up on my back porch because they had read some article that, see that damn Matt and Ben and Casey, they got to stop. They showed up on my back porch, and somehow they had read some article, and the girl she wanted to be an actor. That's what she wanted to do since she was 3. And her older sister was becoming an admired physicist.
Right.
And this child was like, okay, when am I getting mine? So they decided I was the guy.
Yeah.
And they show up, and I'm looking at this kid. I'm like, what am I going to do here? But it was so powerful. It was such poignant. My wife is giving me the look. Don't you be mean. Don't you say something rude to these people. So I decided, okay, we're going to do this for 2 sessions. Okay. I'm not even going to charge you.
Yeah.
We're going to do this for 2 sessions. And I know you'll recognize this. So she's a bundle of energy. Anything I asked her to do, she did. And so finally, I guess it was the 3rd session, I decided, okay, this is worth investing. So the 3rd session, I decided we're doing Zoom, which for me was like, I didn't even know what, I mean, God bless you. You probably know how to handle this. I didn't. I'm like, what am I doing? I don't even know what I'm seeing here. I'm looking at this picture. Is it real time, or is there stuttering going on? Oh my God, but I gave her some direction. I just, don't ask me why. The devil, because she wasn't seasoned yet. And I
Right.
just said to her, it seems to me the characters don't blah. What if she were thinking this way? What do you think that would look like? Well, she nailed it. She
Right.
came up with something that was so stunning. I said, "Oh," and as I've said before and alluded to before, that was like mainlining heroin. Once that happened, it was like, oh, the high came on, the rush came. I was like, oh, I'll be doing this. So for a while, that was how I really scratched the itch, and I had the woodshed because
Right.
I'd been away from working in the theater for about 10 years. So I had the woodshed. I had to go back and remember, especially with kids. I'd been working in theater off and on, but working with kids, it'd been a while. So I had the woodshed a little bit, go back like, okay, how am I supposed to think about this? Like, and we're not in a classroom. And I will say, and this is an old man speaking, so I'm going to preface it with that. I will say she came for one in-person session. It turned out that it happened. The family was ended up being about 20 minutes away from my house for a weekend, and they asked, could we come and see you in person again? And so, of course, and I did a live 2-hour session with her, and
Right.
I learned more and saw more with her in the room with me
Right.
than I ever did in 25 lessons on screen. So for me, it was like, I don't even know if I'm doing this kid justice. I
Right.
don't even know if I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing what I can do, but something more needs to happen because I'm seeing so many other things that I couldn't see on screen.
Right.
And then, as I say, circumstances kind of led up to our not being able to work together. But that was as I say, up until about a year ago, that was how I scratched my theater
Right.
itch, and I have to say I really loved it, even though I had misgivings. My wife would tell you that the night before, well, the week before, I'm gathering material, but the night before, I'm like tearing my hair out. Why did I agree to do this? I got to have a 9 o'clock class tomorrow with this kid, and I don't even. But it was it rewarded me in ways that
Right.
I'm grateful for. Yeah.
I do have to say, you said Cape Cod like you're from Massachusetts earlier, but that's I'll bring that back. So
Oh, but I didn't say Cape Cod.
yeah,
I
well,
didn't
yeah,
say
it wasn't
that.
too hard. It wasn't too hard. So you've been very gracious with your time. I want to get you out of here on kind of an interesting question that I really haven't been able to ask anybody in almost 200 of these. Because of your English literature, dramatic literature background, you probably went about teaching a little different than probably somebody that was raised on stage. And so my question is kind of what is it that you think you uniquely brought to a theatrical classroom or a directing a show that was uniquely from your dramatic literature reading background, pretty much?
Wow. That's, I'll tell you, Blake, that's a tough question. But for two reasons for me. I don't know what other people do.
Yeah. Okay.
I've seen other people's work. I've heard other people come and talk to me about, say, choices I've made in the past. Why did you do? So it was clear that I had done something that was unconventional.
Right.
But I don't know that I could codify that. I mean, I came to it, as I said, as I came to it with huge respect for the text, for
Yeah.
writers, a huge respect for that. I would say probably more for me that what I believe I brought, and I don't know this to be true, so I don't mean to offend any of your listeners who are also theater educators and are like, "What's this guy talking?" But I go back to my main man Jeff Fox, who talked about creating a group. I think that's what I brought.
Okay.
When I remember speaking to directors who would say, "Well, I never made that choice. I don't believe that." And I'm like, "Well, why don't you believe it? What's your problem? Well,
Yeah.
who's got the difficult?" I think that's where the literary or certainly the influence of my mentor, but certainly where that whole notion of approaching literature with an open mind as to, well, some people don't approach a literature that way either. So there you go.
Right.
I don't know how I know I'm kind of ending on a really kind of weak note here, but I don't well, I'll tell you what I brought. I wasn't trained in a
Right.
theatrical program. I didn't buy into any of the politics. I didn't know them. Not that I didn't buy into them. That's incorrect.
Yeah.
I didn't know them. I
Yeah.
didn't know what the hierarchical structure was. It's like, yo, you're in a play. Here's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, we don't do that. I mean, that no, the lead actor doesn't paint sets. Are you kidding me? We're
Right.
talking about a 16-year-old. She damn well going to be painting sets. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. And so there was that sense that I don't. It's not like I didn't respect. Well, no, I'll take that back. I didn't respect some of those kinds of judgments. When I
Right.
listen to theater people when I'm younger now, and I don't know what it's like now, but I listen to them talk about other theater people, kids who wanted to be actors. I want to go on stage and say, it's a hell of a business. It's mean.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to be that person. And I know you think you're going to be taken advantage of, but I want you to go out. I want you to create communities that really care about the work they're doing. So I don't know. Was that different? I don't know. But I do know that I did not participate in any of that. And I
Right.
know that there were times when I felt deficient.
Right.
Because I'd be in a room with all these folks who had their MFAs and their whoosies. And I'm like, ooh, these people know stuff that, I don't know if I can handle that. And then I figured out, well, I could pull out my English major crap too if I wanted to, and I could stun them a little bit. I'm not doing it. I don't have a desire to participate.
Right.
So maybe that was it.
Minor wisdom.